I don't remember the first time my father stopped seeing me. Maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was a slow fading, the kind you don't notice until you're no longer in the picture at all. For years, I thought if I kept quiet, if I worked harder, if I stayed small enough not to bother anyone, he'd look at me again the way he used to. But silence became its own kind of punishment. A language I learned just to survive in that house. He used to talk about pride like it was oxygen. Every dinner, every holiday, every story about my brother's achievements, it filled the room until there was no air left for anyone else. And I sat there smiling, applauding, pretending it didn't suffocate me. But grief does strange things to people. It strips away the layers of pretending. The day I stood there, listening to him praise my brother in front of a crowd, repeating the same story he's told for years, the one where I quit something inside me shifted. I realized silence isn't loyalty. It's surrender, and I've surrendered long enough. He doesn't know it yet, but the story he's been telling, the one where I disappear, is about to end. I hadn't planned on coming back to San Diego, but the invitation to my brother, Evan's SEAL graduation, trembled in my hand when I opened it. For 20 years, I'd been nothing more than a passing mention in this family, half a sentence in someone else's story. Part of me wanted to toss that letter in the trash. The other part needed to see if my father still believed the same story he'd been telling his whole life. The base shimmered under the late morning sun, flags snapping in the ocean wind. Brass-gleamed cameras flashed, and rows of families waved as the band played the Navy March. I walked in alone, taking a seat in the back where shadows softened the edges of the day. The silver watch on my wrist caught a flicker of light. One of those details that only meant something to people who knew what it was. Up front, my father sat tall, owning the space the way he always did. His voice carried even before I saw his face. Someone leaned toward him, asked something I couldn't hear, and he replied calm and proud, the way men like him always are. Laughter followed, heads nodded. I looked down at my hands, steady but cold. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel humiliated, just empty. Then the music changed, the cadets marched in, boots striking the ground in perfect rhythm. The ceremony had begun, and that was when I saw him. Admiral Thomas Collins, he moved with quiet authority, his presence unmistakable. His gaze swept the crowd once, then stopped on me, just a small nod. Precise, deliberate, the kind only another officer would notice. No one else saw it, but I did. And I knew right then that the silence I'd been living in was about to break. El Paso mornings always began the same way. Radio static humming out the news from some military base. The smell of burnt coffee drifting through the kitchen. My father ruled that house like it was still an outpost. He measured the world in rank, obedience, and the sound of heels clicking on the floor. To him, discipline was devotion and honor meant control. When the letter came from Annapolis, I thought he might smile. He didn't. He read the header, folded the newspaper he'd been holding, and set it aside as if I'd told him I was moving to another planet. Women don't last there, he said quietly. Not with anger, just certainty. The kind that leaves no room for hope. My mother, Lydia, stood by the sink dish towel, trembling in her hands. When he walked out of the room, she pressed a folded note into my palm. 8 words written in her slanted handwriting. Don't let his definition become your boundary. The next morning I left before sunrise. The air was still, the porch light yellowing the cracked concrete. When the screen door shut behind me, it made a soft, metallic click that sounded like something closing for good. The years that followed were hard but familiar. Early mornings, endless drills, the taste of salt and metal. I learned to survive in a world that didn't expect me to. I didn't speak much, but I listened. Memorized patterns, read what others missed. Somewhere along the line, I stopped trying to be seen. They started calling me the quiet radar. Always watching, never off. It fit, it said everything I couldn't. 10 years later in Guam, the world narrowed to wind. Static and the slow pulse of a radar screen. The mission was called Silent Depths. A SEAL team had gone dark while scouting a disputed zone. And I was running satellite coordination from command. When the storm rolled in, the lines blurred, rain hammering metal signals breaking apart into shards. I issued the order to pull them back. It was the right call, but one corrupted data feed sent them the wrong way. By the time we realized it, Lieutenant Aaron Moore, my closest friend, the only person who'd ever told me to stop apologizing for being good at my job, was gone. I sat staring at the blank monitor long after the last transmission faded. The hum of the generator, the only sound left outside. The wind kept pounding the windows, as if the ocean itself wanted to come in and take the rest of us. 3 days later, the report arrived. Confidential Level 6. My name wasn't on it, the mission was sealed. The records scrubbed, everyone moved on except me. They told me I'd done my duty, and then they told me never to speak of it again. No memorial, no headline. No mention when I got back stateside. I wrote a letter to my father. I'm still serving, just not somewhere you can see. I never mailed it. I tucked it away in a small wooden box with my old ID tags. The only proof that any of it ever happened. Then I closed the lid and learned to live with the sound of that silence. 15 years had passed by the time I went home again. The house in El Paso hadn't changed, but it felt smaller, like time had taken something from its walls. The air was heavy with the smell of old wood and dust, and the ticking clock in the hallway sounded slower than I remembered, every second dragging behind it a lifetime. My mother was gone, heart failure. They said quiet the way she did everything. The church was small, whitewashed and sunlit, tucked off a back road near the desert. An American flag was folded perfectly over her casket. My father sat in the front pew, posture rigid, his expression unshaken. Still the soldier, even in grief. When one of his old friends leaned over and asked if I was still working in .C, he answered without looking at me. She served for a little while, realized early that not everyone's built for that life. The words fell into the air like stones dropped in water. Around us, people nodded, offering sympathy. Poor man. They said at least he has Evan. I didn't speak, I couldn't. To defend myself would mean tearing open something sacred, both the story he lived by and the oath I had sworn to protect others. After the service, I stayed behind to clean up. The sunlight faded through the blinds as I walked into my mother's room. On her dresser sat a small tin box, the kind she used to hide birthday money in. Inside were faded photographs, a few yellowed letters, and one sealed envelope marked faintly in pencil. "Keep this between us," she said. My breath caught. I opened it and found a copy of the after-action report from Operation Silent Depths, stamped confidential and signed by Admiral Thomas Collins. At the bottom, in my mother's handwriting, was a single line for Richard's peace of mind. I sat down hard on the edge of her bed, the paper shaking in my hands. So that was it. She had chosen silence too. Not out of shame, but out of love. To keep her husband's pride intact, she had erased her daughter's existence. Outside, the flag on the porch lifted and fell with the wind. I watched it through the window and realized something I'd never wanted to admit. Everyone in my family served something. My father served pride, my mother served loyalty. And I had spent my whole life serving their silence. A month later, a letter from the Department of the Navy arrived at my apartment in Dionysus thick paper. Golden seal. I didn't even need to open it to know. By order of the President of the United States, Commander Paisley Reed is hereby promoted to Rear Admiral, U.S. Navy. I stared at the words until they blurred. It felt like reading about a stranger. Someone who lived a life I once dreamed of, before being buried under years of classified ink. Later that week, I was called to a briefing at the Pentagon. The conference room smelled like coffee and steel. Admiral Collins walked in, steady as ever, and gestured for me to sit. "Your record's been restored," he said evenly. It was never erased. only sealed I didn't look at him. My hands tightened in my lap. My father believed I walked away. I said, "Your mother asked for that." He replied, "She thought she was protecting him during the election?" Protecting him, the words echoed. Protecting him by burying me. She buried me alive to keep him proud. I murmured. He paused, his tone softening. "No. She just didn't think. You needed the world to know what she already did." I wanted to believe him, but all I could think about was that tin box. Her handwriting, her choice. The love that became a prison. When I left the building, the afternoon light spilled across my new white uniform. I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Silver bars, gold trim. The insignia of a rear admiral. It should have felt like redemption, but it didn't. It felt like standing in someone else's victory. Back in my hotel room, I checked my phone. A message from Evan blinked on the screen. "Dad's preparing his speech for the SEAL graduation next week. He's excited you coming." I typed back one word, maybe. Then I set the phone down and stared out the window at the city lights. The truth was out, but it didn't matter. Not until the man who'd told the world I failed finally learned that I never left at all. My father's voice on the phone was flat. "Stripped of feeling. Evan's ceremony is Saturday. If you want to come, come." Not an invitation in order. I said yes anyway for my mother. The house in El Paso hadn't changed, only emptied. My mother's photo still hung in the center of the wall. Evan's in uniform gleamed beside it. Mine sat lower, the frame-chipped glass slightly clouded. Dinner was quiet, polite. Suffocating steak, mashed potatoes, a bottle of wine no one finished. My father held the table like a commander addressing his troops. He told his guests that honor belonged to those who never back.